Thank you. And we have one more presentation before we break. And very excited to have two attorneys with us speaking about spousal impoverishment. And I'll go ahead and introduce you both and then ask you to come forward. So our first speaker is Chuck Bentjen. He's been involved in elder law Nebraska for nearly 40 years. He served as the elder law specialist for the Lincoln Area Agency on Aging from 1988 to 1991. He then became the legal services developer for the state of Nebraska and served in that role from 1991 to 1994. During his time there, Chuck was elected as the president of the National Association of Legal Services Developers. Chuck was active in working with the Older Americans Administration and then the Senate Select Committee on Aging in developing and passing Title VII of the Older Americans Act, the Elder Rights Title, and other legislation. Chuck's advocacy in guardianship and conservatorship issues resulted in major changes to Nebraska's guardianship laws in 1993, ensuring that people could no longer obtain a guardianship based on advanced age. Working in conjunction with then Senator Whiteman's office, he drafted revisions that required the proposed ward to receive actual notice of the petition along with an explanation of their rights, require the courts to limit a guardian's authority unless shown that full guardianship is necessary, and requires all guardians go through training. After leaving the department, Chuck began serving as the legal services supervising attorney for the South Central Nebraska Area Agency on Aging, and he began serving as the legal services provider for the Blue Rivers Area Agency on Aging in July of 2021. Accompanying Chuck in this presentation is Jason Davis. Jason has a Bachelor of Arts in History and Sociology and a Juris Doctor. He has been with the Department of Health and Human Services since 2012 and in the Policy and Regulatory Compliance Unit since 2015. So please join us in welcoming both Chuck and Jason.
Okay, you start.
Gentlemen. And your clicker is ready.
Well, good morning. Thank you for having us here today.
Thank you.
I'm Jason Davis, and this is Chuck Bentjen. So we are here to talk about the Medicaid Spousal Impoverishment Program. And I'll go through, kind of from the department perspective, try and kind of quickly go through how the program works, how to get involved in the program, how to make contact with the agency, as you work through the program, and Chuck is going to give kind of an outsider's perspective on how things work. So, before I got started on the Spousal Impoverishment Program, I just kind of wanted to go through a few numbers here, in case you're wondering, why are we ruining your fun talking about Medicaid? About 70% of people who reach age 65 are going to need some sort of long-term services and supports at some point in their life. And about 24% of people who reach 65 are going to need 2 or more years of long-term services. In Nebraska, last year, the average cost of a private nursing home room was $8,289 a month, which is just a hair under $100,000 a year. So even people who have been very diligent and very careful in planning for their retirement, if they have some sort of a medical event and they need some long-term services, you can pretty quickly run through all of your resources. And that's usually where Medicaid comes in. We're usually the payer of last resort. But nationwide, about 42% of all long-term care costs are paid by the Medicaid program. So more than Medicare, more than private insurance, more than people paying out of pocket, it is usually Medicaid who's covering the long-term care expenses. But we're going to focus on the Spousal Impoverishment Program And Spousal Impoverishment Program covers kind of one specific situation where somebody needs long-term care. And that's the situation where you have a married couple and one spouse may be in relatively good health, able to take care of themselves, able to live at home, but that other spouse needs some services and supports. And before Spousal Impoverishment Program came along, if Medicaid was going to cover some long-term services and supports, the couple would have to spend down until both of them qualified for Medicaid. So this program came along to kind of be able to separate their finances so that the spouse who needs assistance can get assistance, and the spouse who's still healthy can still maintain a good standard of living. So the point is that the one who needs care can get care. And spousal impoverishment is going to come in anytime you've got one spouse who needs a nursing home level of care for 30 days or more. And a nursing home level of care is just kind of what it sounds like, the level of care that somebody would get if they were in a nursing home. The program can cover one spouse in a nursing home. It can also cover home and community-based services or waiver services, as they're often referred to. So anytime you've got that one spouse who needs that level of care for more than 30 days, you can look at the Spousal Impoverishment Program. And a couple can start the process for the Spousal Impoverishment Program anytime. So they don't have to be ready to apply for Medicaid to kind of get started on the process. And how the program works, again, anytime there's that nursing home level of care and they're going to need it for more than 30 days, they can start in on the spousal impoverishment process. That process starts with what's called an assessment of resources. The assessment of resources just kind of catalogs everything that couple owns. So all their bank accounts, vehicles, property, if they've got trust assets, business assets, anything that couple owns. We'll kind of come in, confirm all the values of that, and we divide that total value by 2, and then the spouse that's still healthy is able to reserve half of that, subject to a minimum and maximum, which we'll touch upon here in a second. So once the family has completed their assessment of resources, they'll know about at what point in time they can apply for Medicaid, and if they need to spend down some of those resources, once they've spent down, that's when they would start the Medicaid application process. And then the spouse who needs assistance, if they're going to qualify for Medicaid, there are some general Medicaid requirements. You have to be a U.S. citizen or have a qualifying immigration status. If you want Medicaid in Nebraska, you've got to be a Nebraska resident. Being able to show that their medical expenses exceed their income, and with the cost of long-term care, that is usually not much of a problem. So once their resources get down to the spousal impoverishment limits, they can become Medicaid eligible. Medicaid also has a general rule that for anyone who's looking for assistance with long-term services and supports, that they can't have gifted or transferred any resources within the last 5 years. The program limits for spousal impoverishment, the minimum and maximum amount that I referred to a minute ago. The minimum currently, $27,480. The maximum is $137,400. Those amounts don't include everything, so it's not going to count the value of your home, the value of your vehicle. There may be some other resources that don't count to that, but those are the limits. Those adjust every year with inflation, so they adjust in January. If you're looking at assistance next year, those might be quite a bit higher. But they do change. So the other thing that the program does is it allows the spouse that needs assistance to shift some of their income to the healthy spouse. And usually with a couple, one spouse has more income than another, and it helps address a situation where the spouse who has the higher income, if they need to go into, say, a nursing home, they can still move some of their income over to the healthy spouse to let that spouse, pay their mortgage, their bills, their medical costs. The current maximum amount is $3,435 a month. And just like the resource amounts, those shift every year with inflation. There's also a home equity limit. To be honest, we have never seen anybody hit that limit in Nebraska. So upside of low property values. There is a process to go through with the Spousal Impoverishment Program. It's a little more complicated than most of our other Medicaid programs. So again, anytime one spouse needs nursing home level of care for 30 days or more, they can start the assessment process. And later on, there are some slides about how to contact the agency to get that process started. Like I mentioned earlier, you don't need to qualify for Medicaid in order to start the assessment process. So anytime that they meet the level of care in the 30 days, they can do the assessment, even if they're not going to qualify for Medicaid for some time. It's best to start the assessment process as soon as possible. We're always going to use the resource limits for the assessment at that first point in time where they needed more than 30 days of nursing home care. It's not unusual for us to see people applying for Medicaid where one spouse has been in a facility for 2 or 3 years. If that's the first point that they're making contact, it can cause a lot of problems with trying to get all of the documentation from the point in time that we're measuring the assessment. So the sooner they get that process started, the better. The other advantage is it lets the healthy spouse know about when they need to apply for Medicaid. We do see sometimes that people have spent almost all of their resources before they come to us. If they would have done the assessment earlier, they could have set more aside for that healthy spouse. So it's definitely to their advantage to get it started early. Give them more time to plan. So, if you can plan for in 6 months, a year, 2 years, we'll need to apply for Medicaid. Knowing that ahead of time lets them kind of take care of their expenses. They can pay off mortgages, make sure they've got a good vehicle, do everything that they can so that the healthy spouse can stay at home. So, like I said, there may be a time period where they need to spend down their resources, but once they've spent the resources down, that's when they would turn in the Medicaid application. When Medicaid gets that application, they'll confirm, the current value of all of the couple's resources, make sure that it meets the amount that they came to on the assessment, and then they'll determine Medicaid eligibility at that point. When they're determining Medicaid eligibility, there's a second phase of it called the designation of resources. And that's just saying, which spouse is going to have ownership of which resources. So, the spouses in the facility may have a bank account and a life insurance policy that will be designated towards them. The rest of the resources would go to the healthy spouse. And generally, we're not going to try and check back on values for the healthy spouse. So anything that they have kept, normally theirs to keep, and we're not going to look back at what they've done with that. So Medicaid does annual renewals. It kind of eases the renewal process if we know which resources we need to look at for the spouse that needs assistance. And then at the time that we're determining eligibility, we'll also look at the income that both spouses have to see if we can shift some of that income from the spouse who needs assistance to the other spouse. So we'll take a look at what their needs are then and move things around if we need to. As far as contacting Medicaid, and this applies both for the assessment process and for the Medicaid application process. We've got several ways that you can access the agency. A lot of people like to do it online. Right now we've got two different websites. So we have the iServe Nebraska website and the Access Nebraska website. Access Nebraska has been around for several years. That's the main portal that we use. And it's got a lot of different health and human services programs that can be accessed through that site. iServe is new. It's only come online in the last few months. So iServe Nebraska, right now you can just do applications, but we're going to be shifting more of the stuff from Access Nebraska to iServe as time goes on. So again, if you're looking at this in 6 months, a year, 2 years, I would start with iServe and see what resources are there. But Access Nebraska is also there. You can reach us by phone at the Access Nebraska call centers. And we've got the Lincoln number, the Omaha number, and then a number for everywhere else in the world. If you're calling Access Nebraska, if you need to do a phone application, if you want to do a phone application, they can take your application completely over the phone. If you'd rather do a paper application, you can call that number. They can mail one out to you. If you'd rather do something in person, you can contact the call center and they can arrange for an in-person appointment at one of the local offices throughout the state. If you have questions about the program, Spousal Impoverishment is kind of a specialized program. There are not a lot of caseworkers who handle those cases. More than likely, if you call the call center with questions about spousal impoverishment, they'll have to refer it to somebody else to give you a call back to answer questions about the program. But they're certainly there if you want to reach out. You can also call your local offices throughout the state. The local offices can answer questions for you about spousal impoverishment, about other programs. The other thing they can do is they can set up an in-person contact. So if you'd rather sit down and talk to somebody, if you have a lot of questions about the program, if you want help filling out an application, if you just want an application, you can pick one up there, you can turn them in at the local office. Several different things that they can do through the local offices. Access Nebraska also has a spot on the website if you want to request a conference with the local office. You can go on the website, pick the local office, pick the time that works for you, and it'll send out that request so that they can set something up. And the DHHS.ne.gov website is the website with all of DHHS's programs. There's Medicaid information on there. There's information about spousal impoverishment on there. There's just a wealth of information on that site. And you know, if you have a relative or someone who's in a facility, if you don't know whether that facility accepts Medicaid, you can go through the public health link. They've got a roster. The roster has all of the information about whether that facility takes Medicaid or not. You can look for different facilities in your area. There's a lot of information on that site. The local area agencies on aging have a lot of experience with Medicaid, with spousal impoverishment, so they can answer a lot of questions, and sometimes they'll even help you get started with spousal impoverishment program or other long-term care planning. The local area agencies on aging also do service coordination for our home and community-based services. So if you have questions about home and community-based services, whether those are appropriate for you, either within spousal impoverishment or outside of it, they can let you know what kind of services are available in your area and let you know what your options are. And then there's my contact information. I'm a little easier to reach by email, jason.davis@nebraska.gov. Any questions about spousal impoverishment, long-term care, Medicaid in general, feel free to send them to me. If I can't answer them, I'll hunt down somebody who can. So, if there are any questions, I can address them now, at least about the Medicaid side of spousal impoverishment.
Yes, but there's a couple questions here. First of all, what happens when the healthy spouse needs waiver or facility? We have had a healthy spouse need AD waiver, and we were told by a Medicaid worker that she would have to file for divorce.
No, they would not have to file for divorce. If it's a situation where, and this happens rather often, where one spouse starts with spousal impoverishment because they need long-term care, and then at some point, the spouse who was healthy now needs long-term care. In that situation, they would no longer be in the spousal impoverishment program, and then we would just look at them as two eligible individuals. So spousal impoverishment is only where the one spouse doesn't need long-term assistance and the other one does.
Also, the spousal impoverishment program states that community spouse maximum income allowance of $3,435 per month. Does that mean that if the community spouse works and makes slightly more than $3,435, the couple is ineligible for the program if one spouse would need to be in a nursing facility for more than 30 days?
No, they wouldn't be ineligible. That limit is just looking at whether there's some income from the spouse who needs assistance that can shift over to the other one. So if the spouse that's still healthy is making above that, we just wouldn't shift any of the income or allocate income from the spouse who's getting assistance. But they still would be able to qualify. All right. Well, I will turn it over to Chuck. Thank you.
I'm not seeing my, oh, okay, it's coming. All
Happy to
right.
help you switch over. This is where we begin. Hi.
All right, my name is Chuck Bentjen, and I've been around a long time, long time. And I'm going to dedicate this presentation to my big brother, Fred. That's him in the lawn chair, and his wife, Lori. Fred just entered a memory care facility in West Point, Nebraska, and it's a great facility, and he's doing great. So we're going to be going through this spousal impoverishment program with them. Sometimes we think of public benefits programs just as a program, and we often overlook the people who need them when we talk about the programs. I think it's very important that we look at them as being designed to help people, and we need to do something differently. These programs are designed to set the guidelines, rules, and regulations that guide us in implementing the programs. So we need to be aware of the rules and the regulations. The people are, however, the bottom line for me, my clients. My first case dealing with a situation involving one spouse, Betty, going into the nursing home was Mark's and Betty. They had been married for 57 years. And Mark's came to me, and you know, the nursing home cost was killing him. And he wanted to know what he could do. And I was just a young lawyer. I didn't know exactly what we needed to do. There was no spousal impoverishment law then. So Betty they'd have to spend everything down to get to $4,000 for Betty because Mark's wasn't going to need Medicaid. And all of the resources except exempt resources would be counted. Mark's could keep the house, the car, sorry for the typo, pay for the burial plots, funeral expenses, and prepay for opening and closing a grave. So at the time, I discovered that we could file for something called a legal separation. And that was allowed at the time. It was a court process that allowed them to stay married, and then the court divided their resources, and the court appointed a guardian ad litem for Betty to make sure that she was taken care of and she had a voice. But we recommended to the court that Marks get to keep more than 50% of the resources, and it worked out. But I have on here the tears. I sat in the courtroom, and when you do a legal separation or a divorce, you have to ask the question, is the marriage irretrievably broken? Is your marriage irretrievably broken? And here's this man sitting up on the witness stand, having been married to Betty for 57 years. So the way I phrase that question is because of your circumstances with your wife in the nursing home and you having to spend everything, is your marriage irretrievably broken? And he was okay with that, but we both cried. That all changed with the spousal impoverishment law, and Jason has given a good presentation about that. And I worked with a lot of couples between the early 90s and 2000 on this, and we just called the local worker. Just said, you know, if I was in Beatrice, I called the Beatrice office and I talked to a worker. They would invite me to come in for an appointment with the client. We'd take in all the information. We'd fill out the IM-72, the not designation, but the declaration of resources. And then we would get to the point where, oops, wrong button. Then we would complete the spend down and we would apply for Medicaid. I was away from the process for some time, and when I recently returned, before I knew Jason, we had some nightmares, and those are stories too. My first story was similar to what the question asked. The worker that they had applied for Medicaid. So the woman had gone to the local office, and actually the worker told her that she had to apply for Medicaid for her husband. Well, he was rightfully denied because he was way over resources. And the worker thought that was the only thing that they could do. So she came to me and I said, well, what about spousal impoverishment? And I called the worker, and the worker didn't know about spousal impoverishment. But we found a worker who knew about spousal impoverishment, so we were able to work through it. And eventually, we were able to go through the spousal impoverishment, get the IM-72 completed, and to do the spend down, and I believe he's now on Medicaid. My second case was a situation where a local couple was under the minimum. So he was going to get to keep all of the resources, and we contacted, we didn't know, we couldn't contact the local worker and make an appointment, so again, we applied through Access Nebraska, and we were assigned a worker, and the worker had never heard of the spousal impoverishment law. Her supervisor had not heard of it. And I shared these with Jason, and he went out and did some teaching about that. But we got to the point where we actually got them convinced that we could do the spousal impoverishment, and we did the spousal impoverishment, and then the supervisor was going to budget them as a couple. And actually it works that you just budget the person as a single, and I wanted to clarify about the income. There is the minimum income thing, but that if the spouse who remains in the home, the community spouse, makes more than that amount, they get to keep that amount. They don't need to contribute for the other spouse's, to the other spouse's income. It's only if the spouse in the nursing home or the spouse in the community makes less than the amount, the minimum amount, then they would get a contribution from the nursing home spouse's income to bring them up to that level. Because the law says there should be a minimum that people can live on. At least that's my understanding of the program and how I've always understood it to work. I always now have, since I've met Mr. Davis, I now do things a little bit differently. I went online and I found I guess this is an IM-72, right?
Yeah.
This is the assessment of resources form. So I sit down with the couple and we actually fill this out. It's not going to be it's not probably going to be accepted as the assessment of resources form, but it gives us a starting place, a place to work from. Then what I do is I contact the long-term care supervisor for the area to schedule the appointment to complete the IM-72. And you can still do that. So I look for who I call the local office and I say, I'd like to talk to the person who supervises the long-term care program. And if I don't find someone, then I can contact Jason and he'll let me know who to call. But they will still schedule an appointment, and I think that's probably the best. You can apply for Medicaid, but if you get a worker who doesn't know about spousal impoverishment, then they're just going to get denied. And there still are some workers who don't know about the spousal impoverishment. And then I always assist the client in spending down the nursing home the share. Generally, we cash them out and put them in different accounts, or we cash out the nursing home shares, nursing home spouse share, put that in a checking account, and we use that to pay for the nursing home. But we also use that to buy any exempt resources like burial plans, if they don't have them. If there are repairs necessary to the house, like a new furnace or a roof, we use that. We also, the rule is that that money can be spent on either spouse, as long as it's being spent on them and not being given away, it's okay. It's a legitimate expense. Then when we get spent down, I assist the client in actually applying for Medicaid. And we usually do that when we're getting close to the 4,000 and we know that it's coming up. One more story. Ed and Loretta. Ed and Loretta had been married a long time. A huge Catholic family. They had 12 children, and 6 of those 12 children were dependent on the farm. Loretta fell on New Year's Eve and broke her neck. She had not yet met her deductible, so she had to meet her deductible, and the very next day she had a new deductible under the Medicare. And the cost of her care was going to be about $30,000 a month. So we looked at that and we knew that spousal impoverishment wasn't going to work because that farm was going to have to be sold. There were so many people working that farm and depending on it. So their priest actually suggested that they contact me and that they get a divorce. The priests understood that they would still be legally married in the eyes of the church, but a divorce really was the only option for them. It still remains an option when you have situations where the spousal impoverishment program is not going to work. And I just met with someone who owns about 15 acres. Well, what the regulations provide is that he would be able to keep the house and enough of the acreage to be able to keep the house. So we figured that he was going to have to sell 13 acres. So that was an option I discussed with him about whether a divorce would be better. One of the things that I want to point out is that if you're going to pursue a divorce in these kinds of cases, you have to know your judge, because you're going to be presenting an unusual situation for a property settlement to the judge. And the judge, if the judge is opposed to Medicaid programs or people using public assistance, that might be problematic. Okay. Man, that went fast.
I think we have
Are
some
there any
questions.
questions?
Yeah, I think
Yeah, we
maybe
do.
for both of you, if you want to step back up too.
Exactly, yeah. Okay, so we'll go ahead and start here. I have several different questions. If a couple has to spend down to be eligible for HCBS, how do they need to know how much to spend if they cannot do the assessment of resources, if they cannot do this until they meet the level of care for 30 days?
Well, that's exactly the point. We need to do this, and we need to be aware of this program, and if they spend down, it's too late. And I've discussed this with Mr. Davis about needing some kind of resource on the website that lets us do an assessment, or at least fill out something like that. But I don't know if that's in the works or not.
It's something that we've looked at, and like I said, right now we're moving to the iServe portal, so maybe something that we can put on there at some point.
Okay.
I think that kind of goes to the same lines of like, can you also talk about the referral process for Medicaid age and disabled waiver program, which will need to be completed at some point for someone needing HCBS and or ALF placement?
Sure. We've changed our assessment process a little bit over the past year or so. When it used to be the AAA agencies that were performing those assessments. Now the department does those assessments on their own. If somebody needs to show that they're meeting that level of care requirement, they can start the assessment process, and once they contact a worker to start the assessment process, the worker can send a referral to the part of the agency who completes those assessments. So it's kind of internal within DHHS that we can do the level of care assessments, but so the referral all happens internally, but if they haven't previously stayed in a facility, they can start the assessment process. The assessment of resources process, we use the word assessment way too much. So they can start the assessment of resources process. We'll send a referral to do the level of care portion of that.
For spousal impoverishment valuation, how are annuities treated?
How are what?
Annuities?
Generally, annuities are, it's my understanding that they're considered, unless it's like a retirement that they can't cash in, right? But they have to try and get the principal amount out of the annuity.
Yeah, so we'll look to see if it has been annuitized or not. So are they able to withdraw any amounts from it, or have they already set it to pay out over a certain term? Medicaid has some specific rules regarding annuities. So those all get sent to us to review.
But when, there are still some people who sell annuities who will tell you that they will not be considered by Medicaid, so you need to be careful about those.
This person says, great information that they've desperately needed. It would be so helpful to have a bulleted process in an outline format. Is there any chance that you have any information like that? This person is a hospital social worker who has worked with numerous tearful couples trying to wade through the need for nursing home and inability to pay. So I think the individual is asking if there's any resources out there with sort of like a bulleted process or an outlined format of this.
I'm putting something like that together. I don't have it done yet, but I will make it available through the area agencies on aging.
All right. Let's see here. Can we ask
More questions?
So one question here regarding the farm family. Have you ever successfully applied for a hardship waiver? This question says, I know it exists, but have you heard of any success stories in actually getting one approved? Another part is, can you discuss what a deprivation of assets is and how it applies to both Medicaid and SIMP? Includes, things like that.
I'm not familiar with any stories about the hardship program. I think it's very difficult to do that. And the second question was?
The second question, hold on a second, let me go back and see here real quick. The second one.
Oh, the deprivation of
Deprivation,
resources.
Yeah. Deprivation of assets.
If someone gives away any resources, then Medicaid, when they apply for Medicaid, they're going to look back 5 years and determine whether or not they gave away anything. And if they gave away anything, then they can't be on Medicaid until they have used the amount that they gave away on their care. That's my understanding of the rule.
That is a pretty good.
And so you need to be very cautious about giving things away.
Okay.
Okay,
Very
well,
good.
thank you all for this opportunity. I appreciate it, and
Yeah.
thank you.
It was very good being up here. Thank you, guys.
Well done. Chuck, Jason, thank you so much. Well done. I think this is a topic we could probably continue talking about for a little while. So we are going to go ahead and break for lunch. We will return at 1:15. We hope you have a lovely lunch, and we look forward to being in your company very soon. Thank you.